Greetings once again, my friends. I am Drak, and welcome to a new series on the channel, but more of a returning one. Welcome to Questing with Drak. Now, some who are coming to this brand new may be wondering how this is a returning series. Back in the Legion and BFA days of World of Warcraft, I actually did live streams for the artifact weapons in the Legion beta, as well as unveiling the class halls that were in there. And then eventually I did that again in BFA, where I did the storylines for the allied races that were being unveiled in Battle for Azeroth at the time. And you guys loved it, and I actually loved doing it. However, because it was live, I actually had a little bit of an issue with how that was being done, in the fact that I also knew a lot more lore that I could actually bring on, because while you're streaming, you have to bring up all of these factoids while also doing the quests. And so I decided to bring this back, but in much more of a storytelling kind of feel, and be able to give my opinions at the end of it and be able to have that discussion with you guys in the comment section if we can, but also to be able to showcase as much information as I possibly can without boring the crap out of you doing it on live stream. So with that, I have decided that the first part of the series, or at least the first thing that we're going to do with it, because so many people have asked, I am going to cover the story of World of Warcraft Dragonflight, which is a big thing, because if people remember, I wasn't very happy with the story direction starting in Battle for Azeroth and then going into Shadowlands. So it actually took a lot for me to actually consider coming back for WoW Dragonflight. I actually wasn't here when it started. It took me a whole 6 months or so before I was willing to even put a card on, which somebody else gave me, and try it out. So at that point, we're going to cover the story, and we're going to see if the new WoW questing team has been able to overcome the mistakes of the past and being able to have the stories be awesome again in World of Warcraft. And I think it's only appropriate, since you guys have already seen the thumbnail of this video and going, why aren't you talking about it? We have to start at the beginning. And technically, the beginning of the story here is when we get to see the new race and hero class of this expansion, the Drakthir Evoker. And so that's what this video is going to be covering to start the story of WoW Dragonflight. So let's get right into it. Oh, and a little note, I am going to try and cover this as chronologically as possible. That's going to be a little difficult in some places. I hope you'll bear with me on it. But we're also going to presume that certain things aren't known in the story as of yet, because as I'm recording this, the last patch is going to be launching pretty soon. So we're going to presume we're starting this for the first time and we're getting events unfolding as they would. So as a starting Drakthir Evoker, we wake up in very old surroundings, but very familiar ones. We wake up in our old barracks, or as they are called in the Drakthir terms, Wayrns. And we are awakening from a stone form and not really knowing what happened to us. And one of the biggest themes of this zone is going to be the fact that we don't remember what happened. We have very clear amnesia of anything before this point. We just get flashes here and there. And so as a brand spanking new evoker, you take it upon yourself to go and free some of your friends and start investigating your surroundings, which are very old. And actually you are starting to see former clutchmates or brothers in arms that didn't get turned to stone, or they didn't survive. Either their stone forms were broken up or they simply died due to old age. So obviously a lot of time has passed at this point. Eventually, we come across both Scale Commanders Azurathel and Cindrathresh. Now, this is usually, like I said, we're going to be covering things chronologically, but now that we have these two, we do need to explain the Wayrns just a little bit. You do get more information as the zone progresses, but basically, we were all former soldiers of the Black Dragon aspect, Neltharion. Now, I know a lot of people know eventually what Neltharion became, but these Drakthir don't know that. And so they still refer to him by his original name, Neltharion, and don't know about his fall. So at that point, we get to learn about the various Wyrns, or comrades in arms, that we also fought with, because this was intended to be a large army that Neltharion was going to have control of. We're guessing for some sort of peacekeeping, the way that they talk, but we're not quite sure. And so at that point, we now need to introduce the various Wyrns. The Wyrns are basically different divisions of an army, is the best way or simplest way to look at it. And so at that point, when you are born as a Drakthir, you would be assigned into one of these Wyrns. And we have the following Wyrns to be able to be brought into. First of all, we have the Obsidian Warders, which are actually led by Scale Commander Aziraphale. And as far as we know, Scale Commanders are the highest authority besides the dragon aspects themselves. So we have the Obsidian Warders, whose primary goal was to defend allies, to defend certain choke points, basically to be base defenders, and also to defend maybe even refugees or other things that are like scale points or certain points of interest. They were to be the defenders of those outposts under the leadership of Aziraphale. Then we also have the Dark Talons, and the Dark Talons, I'm not quite sure how they were supposed to line up, but the way that they make them sound is that they were supposed to be the Spartans of the army. They were supposed to be the elite troopers that would take on the tougher tasks and make sure that either we could continue to hold a choke point, as well as being able to put the odds a little bit more in the Drakthir's favor. And those are led by Scale Commander Cinderthresh, one of the other two that we have now met. Later on, we come to know the Healing Wings. These are obviously, as you could tell, the healers and the medics of the Drakthir. And so alongside the Obsidian Warders, I assume, they would be working within these places to be able to help aid the sick and infirm, as well as being able to aid the injured defenders of a base or frontline troops. And so that's their primary goal, and they are led by Scale Commander Viridia. We also have the Ebon Scales, and from what I can tell, the Ebon Scales were supposed to be the main force, the basic infantry, the front line of the Drakthir, and they are led by Scale Commander Sarkareth. And then finally, we have the Adamant Vigil. The Adamant Vigil was basically the intelligence gathering arm of the Drakthir, and being able to make sure that all was known so that Neltharion and the Drakthir could always walk in prepared. They are led by Scale Commander Emberthal. Now that we've explained that, we meet up with Aziraphale and Cinderthresh. They're just barely waking up as well, along with friends like Kadethi, and we are continuing to explore the surroundings and learn of what happened with the Drakthir and just maybe how much time has passed, but we're starting to notice a major problem. We are being guarded by the Blue Dragonflight, not necessarily the Black Dragonflight who we loyally serve. We meet their leader, Lepisagos, as he sends out a containment army of Draconid to try and, well, contain us within our Wyrns. And obviously we have to fight them back in order to be able to get out of this Wyrn to begin with, confronting Lepisagos, and eventually stepping out into the Forbidden Reach. The Forbidden Reach is, for lack of a better term, the overall barracks and outpost of the Drakthir. And as they notice when they come out, it is very overgrown. Many years have passed, many centuries, many millennia have passed since they were actually here, because this was actually more of a war camp than it is a jungle. But before we do anything else in terms of exploration, we then come across Emberthal, who, as far as we can tell, the Adamant Vigil has been heavily hit by either Blue Dragon forces. We're not quite sure, but her forces aren't necessarily that great. In fact, to my knowledge, I didn't see too many that had the title of the Adamant Vigil, aside from Emberthal. So at that point, we can assume that a lot of the Adamant Vigil was probably taken out in some way or another. But in order for us to be able to continue to handle the situations on the Reach, we need to get our bearings back. So we learn to fly again, and we learn a lot of our main mechanics of being a Drakthir, like being able to breathe fire, being able to soar in the clouds, being able to hover on the ground. And that in turn leads us to information that both Viridia and Sarkareth are in serious trouble. So Aziraphale decides that we all need to split up, and sends, I believe, Cinderthresh out to go look for the Ebon Scales, while we take on the task of looking, or actually, no, Cinder Thresh is sent with us. We take on checking in on the Healing Wings, while Aziraphale goes and checks on the Ebon Scales. And when we get there, we notice that a poison has been let out in the Wern of the Healing Wings. And even though the Blue Draconid are also attacking them and they are enemies, Viridia doesn't really look at it that way. And so she decides to start healing them and treating them like allies, because that's what her Wern, her specific division does. And we also notice that Cinder Thresh and Viridia have a very close friendship. We're not sure how deep it goes, but they know each other, and they definitely have something going on. I'm going to guess some level of chemistry, but we're not quite sure. Once we take care of the Healing Wings and get them back up and running, we then go meet up with Aziraphale as we look to see a new enemy is assaulting the Ebon Scales Wern. That enemy, we learn later, is called the Primalists. We don't know who they are. All we know is that they are attacking our brothers in arms, so we have to stop them. And they are being led by a Tauren by the name of Kurog Grimtotem. Many people who are listening to this are very aware of the Grim Totems, but to bring people up to speed, they are all led by Magatha Grimtotem, who has committed some very evil acts throughout WoW, including being part of the death of Cairn Bloodhoof, specifically poisoning the axe Gorehall that Garrosh Hellscream used against Cairn, thus resolving in Cairn's untimely death. So the Grim Totems being involved here is not necessarily all that surprising. They are mostly shamans, and Kurog, we're guessing, is empowered by whatever these primalists are worshipping and are utilizing the elements to be able to gather energy for the primalist movement. We stop their efforts at least to a little bit and then meet up with Aziraphale to free Sarkareth and the Ebon Scales from their barracks and finally have the aid of the main force and infantry of the Drakthir. It is at this point that we are then introduced to two black dragons. These are the first black dragons we've seen in what appears to be millennia, and they introduce themselves as Abyssian and Rathian. We don't really know who these people are. We know they're black dragons, which means they probably serve Neltharion, but they obviously know a lot more than they're letting on, and that creates a problem for us, but we at least know that we can somewhat trust them. For those who don't know who Abyssian and Rathian are, Abyssian is a Highmountain Tauren shaman that we met in the expansion Legion and found out that he was actually a purified black dragon found by Holn Highmountain. And so at that point, he decided to serve the Highmountain Tauren as their lead shaman for many years after that, many generations, and now he is more embracing his black dragon heritage. Rathian, in case you guys don't know, he actually started from a quest way back in the Cataclysm-changed Badlands, where a red dragon was trying to purify a black dragon egg, and eventually was found out by none other than Deathwing himself. Well, thankfully, the egg did hatch, and Rathian is what came out of that. And Rathian obviously has his own story that we could ultimately go into. He's been a little bit of a mob kind of character, or a mob-ish kind of character, but also he did help us out in Battle for Azeroth in taking care of the old gods. So he's kind of one of those, can we really trust him kind of characters? But obviously he's probably our only allegory to the Alliance at this point. It is then we realize what the true goal of the Primalists are as they try to move on what is called the Vault. We're not sure what they mean by that. We try to stop them, but unfortunately it is too late. And Raszageth the Storm Eater is released.
Mistress of the storm, the primal powers have risen to set you free.
The elements say new age for this world. Have you found my kin?
We know where they are imprisoned, Storm Eater.
Soon, their bonds will be broken. And what is this? The brood of Neltharion. I felt his demise reverberate through the earth, and reveled in it. Perhaps you wish to share his fate.
I had wished to become what he was meant to be. What he should have been.
You do not fathom what dragonkind was meant to be. But you will. Go! Tell them we will scour this world of the Titan's stain. Let the storm be the harbinger of our return.
Raszageth, a powerful proto-drake, has been released, and obviously has all of the Primalists kneeling at her feet. So we obviously know that this is not a good sign. This is probably what they were coming for to begin with. And thankfully, while we are trying to run from the fury that is Raszageth, we then get to meet the bronze dragon aspect Nozdormu, who has come to help us out, as well as fulfilling his own goals. While we are running away from Raszageth, we make sure to free both Rathian and Abyssian, try to learn a little bit more about our past, but because of the urgency of the situation, they're not able to tell us much, only that a lot of time has passed since then. We rally ourselves up to Nozdormu, and Nozdormu and Raszageth have a little bit of confrontation. Seems they know each other fairly well.
Raszageth!
I am pleased that not all of the aspects have met a bitter end. Not yet. Tell your queen I am coming for her. The storm's reckoning comes for you all!
The release of Raszageth heralds great danger for this world, just as your awakening heralds great change. The kingdoms of Azeroth must be warned. Go to them. Along the way, you may discover a new destiny of your own.
And in turn, a message is left to Nozdormu as well as Rathian to send to Alexstrasza that Raszageth is coming for the Mother of Dragons. Now, during this conflict, we also have a moment where Rathian tries to confront Raszageth, and unfortunately, it is let known very quickly, because of Rathian's foolhardiness, let's call it that Neltharion, the aspect that we serve, is long dead. Some of us take that well. Others, like Sarkareth, don't really take that well.
Sarkareth, my Waren will follow Rathian to the city called Stormwind. Come with us.
I am done taking orders. Our vow to serve the dragons is sundered, just as Neltharion broke his promises to us. Let the ebon scales be forgotten. We are now the Sundered Flame. We will claim the destiny that is ours by right.
His anger pushes him down a dark path. I dread the day we meet again. Not as friends, but as rivals on the field of battle.
Sarkareth then decides to disband himself from the Drakthir overall and take his Waren, who he's now calling the Sundered Flame, and try to assess or at least gain some kind of inheritance that Sarkareth feels that they are entitled to, given that they were supposed to be Neltharion's peacekeepers. Basically, he's acting like most black dragons that we have seen throughout most of WoW. It is then decided, because of Razageth and the threat that she brings, we are then introduced to the fact that we're going to need aid, and that the Dragon Isles are going to need protection. So Nosdormu, along with Abyssian and Rathian, suggest that we then go and get some aid from the Alliance and the Horde. Aziraphale and Cindrathresh both take up those posts. If you are an Alliance Drakthir, you go with Aziraphale to Stormwind, and if you are a Horde Drakthir, you go with Cindrathresh to Orgrimmar. At that point, we then are speeded by the spans of time from Nosdormu to get to those places as quickly as we possibly can, because we need to start defending the Dragon Isles ASAP. At that point, we are then separated into the various factions. We'll start things off obviously with Rathian and the Alliance, as Aziraphale and ourselves go to Stormwind to meet with, at this point, Turalyon, the acting king. I believe his title is Supreme Commander. We go to meet with Turalyon in order to pledge our allegiance and also gain the Alliance's aid for the Dragon Isles. It's just unfortunate that Rathian doesn't necessarily have the best reputation when it comes to Stormwind. Meanwhile, at Orgrimmar, Abyssian and Cindrathresh are meeting up with the Horde leaders, who now have a Horde council, thankfully, and finding out that they also kind of get a weird welcome, but more along the lines of Abyssian bringing a lot of new friends, let's put it that way. And in turn, he separates off to go meet with the leadership of the Horde in order to secure their aid, as well as being able to secure any kind of aid ship to getting to the Dragon Isles. It is at this point that both stories kind of intersect, as either Rathian or Abyssian will pull us aside and teach us how to gain a Visage. A Visage is basically a human form for a dragon aspect, or a dragon that is capable of doing so. Not every dragon within a Dragonflight is capable of it. It's considered to be advanced magic, but at least the Drakthir know about Visages, and it turns out your character is just as powerful enough to be able to create a Visage of their own. It is at this point that both Aziraphale and Cindrathresh, along with Abyssian and Rathian, secure the aid of the Alliance and the Horde, and the campaign to go to the Dragon Isles begins, but thankfully, not necessarily in the way that it has in the past, as both factions agree this is the Dragon's home. We are not necessarily going to bring a brand new war to their shores. And in turn, most of this expedition will be led by what are now being called the Dragonscale Expedition. It is a merging of both the Explorers League and the Reliquary of the Horde to be able to have just a more exploring kind of entourage going into the Dragon Isles, and we can all go as protectors and not necessarily have to worry about what the other faction is doing. And that pretty much wraps up the starting zone story for the Drakthir. So at this point is where I would give my final thoughts on what I thought of going through the zone itself. Now, I should say, originally, when we were leveling in these zones, there were only 2 specs to speak of. We only had Devastation and Preservation. But as you guys might notice through some of the footage I'm providing, a 3rd spec was launched, and that is Augmentation. And part of that is because I would like to be able to try it, as they are now boasting it as the first ever support class. Now we don't have the Holy Trinity of MMO roles. We now have a quadrilogy? We have a square, let's put it that way. So I wanted to be able to try that out and see if they were able to hold their own, but obviously one can only go to one faction, so you also have been seeing some other footage of my intended evoker, who is going to be Alliance-based. So my final thoughts are a little complicated when it comes to the Drakthir starting zone. I don't necessarily think it's bad. One of my biggest problems with it is that it is fairly short in storytelling. And considering that this is the 3rd hero class, that doesn't help it, as the 2 previous hero classes, the Demon Hunter and the Death Knight, had amazing zones with tremendous amounts of lore, and I get why the evokers couldn't necessarily do this, because a lot of their lore is hidden from them because of the amnesia angle, but unfortunately it does play against it a little bit, at least to me. Compared to those other zones, which eventually will get videos of their own, it's just an okay kind of an experience compared to them. I feel like there was a lot more invested into the Death Knight and the Demon Hunter than there was in the Evoker, even though we could have potentially a lot more tales to be able to tell with the Drakthir. And actually, one of my additional thoughts is that the video that we're going to be covering next, I actually think should have been involved in the starting experience and probably would have at least filled that gap a little bit and might have made it a little bit more in-depth and thus what a lot of players would expect from a WoW racing class. So I'm not saying that it's bad. To me, it's okay. But overall, compared to the other hero classes, it does kind of fall short. And that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. So when we come back, the next Questing with Drak is actually going to be covering the Legacy mini videos that came out just before Dragonflight even unleashed. Yes, technically, the Drakthir came out about a week or two before Dragonflight even launched. And then we had the Legacies. And these Legacies, I think, honestly, should have been involved in that starting zone. But we'll get to that when we get there. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this introduction to Questing with Drak. Please feel free to leave a comment down below if this is not necessarily what you want, or if you have any suggestions for either Questing with Drak videos that we can do, or any other things that you think might improve the videos. I am definitely open to those. Also, for those who are joining us brand spanking new, please leave a like and a subscribe. It really does help out the YouTube channel, and it allows for me to be able to make more of these videos should you like them. So at that point, I will see you guys next time for the Legacy videos. Until then, have a good day or night when you're watching this, and take care.